everyone. Thank you for joining us today. No matter what time it is, where you're at, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We are so happy that you are here with us today live. And today we will be presenting another session on the Developer Student Club Solution Challenge. So to kick things off, I would love to introduce myself and the topic that we will be focusing on today. Today, our topic is taking a project from idea to launch. And I am one of your co-hosts. My name is Alina, and I am a Google Developer Experts Program Manager at Google. And now I'll hand it over to my colleague, Kyle.
Hi, I'm Kyle Paul. I'm the North America Regional Lead. So I look after developer student clubs as well as Google Developer Experts here in North America. So excited to chat with you. We have a great guest speaker today and to help further you along with your Solution Challenge project. So very excited for that. And I'm excited to join Alina on this. As many of you know, today, this year's Solution Challenge is covering the 17 UN challenge goals. And so from all of these, there's lots of different ways that you can narrow down your project to one of the 17 or, kind of combine a couple of these, depending on how your idea and the direction. And so this is kind of what today's session is going to, cover is how to kind of figure out where your idea lies, how does it apply to these different topics. And so very excited that, we're, challenging ourselves as well as all of you to, for this year's Solution Challenge to target one of these 17 or more. And so excited to see how this goes.
And just as a reminder, on the DSC Solution Challenge website, you can actually access 3 different videos that will give you a broader overview of what the challenge is all about, as well as how to proceed with your project. So our first video is an intro to the challenge that will give you a good summary of what the Solution Challenge focuses on. The next video is the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, as Kyle just mentioned. So you'll get an overview and some ideas to get started to focus your project around these 17 goals. And then finally, we have a video on how to build your project. And this is a walkthrough from start to finish. What are some steps and tips for you to get started? Once you join the Solution Challenge, as soon as you register, you will actually get a link to join our online mentorship platform called Partheon. So within Partheon, you will get access to different mentors that will be able to answer any technical questions on Google-related products that you might have as you're developing your solution. You can also get feedback on the ideas that you're brainstorming, whether you're just starting out and you have a general idea, or if you're progressing through your project and you need more specific guidance. And then finally, you can get advice specifically from our Google Developer Experts. We're going to have more than 100 experts that will be part of this online platform, ready to answer all of your questions and mentor you along the way.
Awesome. And if you haven't already, you can register today at the short link there, Google/Solution Challenge. There's also, if you are tuning in and you're not part of a DSC, you can find the main Solution Challenge chapter at dsccommunity.dev 2021 Solution Challenge. Now, so we're very excited to have Bryce join us today. He is a Google Developer Expert, and I won't go too much into his bio. I'll let him explain himself a little bit, but he is an amazing GDE here in North America. He helps all our communities out, the developer student clubs, Google developer groups, fellow GDEs, as well as our startups. So I'd like to introduce Bryce and welcome him to the stage. Hey, Bryce, welcome.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And to kick off and remind everybody in the audience really quick, so there is a Q&A tab next to the chat, which I see a bunch of chats happening. So if you have any questions for us or Bryce during this chat, feel free to go ahead and drop those questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll get to those there. This way they don't get lost in all the comments. So, but we love to see the comments. Keep commenting, but go ahead and drop any questions over there. And so, Bryce, go ahead and kick off with a little intro to yourself and a little bit about your career path.
Sure. Well, Kyle, you know me pretty well at this point, so maybe we should play a little party game to get started. I love the game Two Truths and a Lie. Have you played that one?
Ooh,
So
I
basically,
have.
I tell you three things, and two of them are true, and one of them is not. Sound fun?
Let's go. Alina, you got to help back me up on this one.
All right. So
Yeah,
you're all gonna have to guess. Um, so let's start with an easy one. I've never had a cavity.
Okay.
I've been stung by a poisonous frog. And I won my fantasy football league 4 years in a row. And I'm on my way to the fifth. Well,
We'll see how the Super Bowl works out, right?
yeah.
Interesting.
So what do you think? Which one is not true?
I feel like it's number two about the frog.
Yeah, I was thinking. I'm leaning towards the frog too.
Ooh, you're both wrong.
Ooh.
The dentist doesn't make a lot of money off of me. I have been stung by a poisonous frog. It's not fun.
Oh, wow.
And I'll tell that story in a little bit. Sadly, I have not won my fantasy football league 4 years in a row. My wife has, and I think she's on the way to getting kicked out of the league because nobody wants to play against her.
He's winning. That's awesome.
So yeah, well, we do those because that's kind of a fun way to get started, right? It's a lot better than me checking bullet points in a bio. But big picture, in high school, I was the mascot for my school. We were the Spuds, which is maybe the worst mascot on the planet. Yes, I was a giant Mr. Potato Head.
That's awesome.
College and grad school, I actually have a Master of Fine Arts in Graphic Design.
Oh, cool.
So I started as a visual designer, learning how to manage the communication and process of things. During that time, I actually helped the University of Minnesota, which is where I am, create the first usability lab in the state.
Wow.
So think one-way glass, eye tracking, all that kind of cool stuff. After that, I got into web because a lot of people said that the designs that I was creating couldn't be produced. I decided to learn how to build those designs so I could prove them wrong, which is always fun. And I was right. They could be produced. And then after that, I've kind of become a consultant where I've worked in a lot of healthcare processes, but I've done advertising. I've done kind of B2C. I've done B2B for business strategy stuff. I've done product development. So I've kind of done this big wrapper around launching an idea. Currently, I'm working on trying to help healthcare be faster and kind of better for the patient. Anybody who's not watching in the United States may not understand how rough a healthcare system can be sometimes, but there are a lot of things that block good care in the United States. So some of the stuff I'm working on is trying to use AI and things like that to speed up those processes and make them make more sense. In between all of that, I spent some time in Costa Rica in what is considered the largest privately funded conservation area in the world. So I was literally working to save the rainforest.
Wow.
That is where I got stung by a poisonous frog. It's not fun. It was, but the process of doing that, about learning how something like a nonprofit organization that is with the goal of bettering something, how the design process fits with their problems and their goals was a real eye opener for me. So being able to take something like, how do you save the rainforest? How do you even convince somebody that it's worth saving, let alone give them the experience that I had when I was there and things like that. So yeah, that's going to be in a nutshell. Today, I am a consultant on product strategy, service design, UX, UI, web. Yeah, pretty much if it's a digital product, I work on some part of it.
Awesome. And with your GDE categories, because you're assistant, you do a lot with UX UI, and what other categories are you in?
Web. So I actually do a lot of front end development. So CSS, HTML, JavaScript, that kind of thing. I love figuring out how to build things that people say are not buildable on the front end. So a lot of Canvas, a lot of cutting edge CSS, solving problems that, how do I layer these 5 things together and get them all to line up, or stuff like that, is also fun. But because I started building for the web in the early 2000s, I also know how to make things work in IE6, which no one should have to do anymore. But I can do it.
Yes. And so with the web category, and this is for, because a lot of these students are thinking about building a mobile app or a web app, stuff like that. And we see these questions pop up all the time. Which framework or platform? So do you have experience in Angular, React, Vue, all these? I
have experience with both Angular and Vue. I could probably muck my way through React enough to make a change or to fix something. But which platform is a hard question, right? I taught HTML for a while, and I always used to everybody used to say, well, what's the right IDE? Where do I write code? And my answer to that has always been this. For anybody who can't see that, it's a pen, right? Pencils work too. But the point is that it's more important to learn how the pieces go together, a specific tool. And the reason I say that is because the tool is going to change. The amazing tool this week is not going to be the amazing tool next month. The way Photoshop, for example, does something today is not going to be the way it does it in 2 years from now. So learning how all the pieces go together, in my opinion, is worth so much more than learning one specific tool, right? Is there a right tool for the job? Probably. But in most cases, when you're building out an idea, you have a long time before you have to have that right tool. So use whatever you're comfortable with or whatever you can spin up fastest to prove out your idea, instead of picking the right technology. Because let's face it, no matter what you build, it's going to be the wrong technology next week or next month anyway.
Yeah, especially when, as much of these students are, they're in that prototyping phase where they first got to figure out, and this kind of leads into my next question for you is, taking, the life cycle of a project and generally. So like they're trying to narrow down which idea that they should go with. Some of them might have an idea, but they don't know what tool to use next in order to launch, eventually launch this as a project. So what are your thoughts there? How to narrow down that idea?
Well, narrowing down the idea, I think you mentioned prototypes. I have this thing that I've written. People always ask me, how much does it cost to make an app? And the problem is apps are like goldfish. They kind of expand to whatever size the environment is you give them. And in the case of an app, right, that environment is your time budget or your money budget, right? So what's it going to cost? Well, it's going to cost as much as you've got, plus probably 20%. What that means is that nobody can really tell you, when you're at that idea stage, nobody can really tell you what it's going to take to make something, and nobody can really tell you if it's right. So what you should do instead is figure out how to make little bets that you can show to people and find out if it's right. We were talking before a little bit about how it's important to remember that you're not the user. So when you're creating, when you're trying to take this idea and you're trying to solve a problem, it's important to find the people who would actually benefit from the problem and talk to them. You can show them a prototype, but sometimes when you're fleshing out your idea, it's important to just watch somebody live their life. I can't count the number of really good insights I've gotten by watching someone's like looking over someone's shoulder while they try to do their job every day, or they try to live their life. Will they try to take money out of an ATM? That's weird if you look over somebody's shoulder when they do that, but you learn stuff. But doing that process, so taking your idea, figuring out who you think benefits from that idea. I think that's an important thing, right? Who you think benefits from that idea, and then going and interacting with them and talking to them. Once you do that, you can say, yeah, this idea has legs, or, well, you know what? People have figured out how to do this already. And my idea isn't 7 or 8 times better to get them to switch the way they do it. Once you land on that kind of big picture idea, then I say prototype something. And my goal is always to prototype something in the fastest and smallest way possible. If you're prototyping an interface, I will often print them out on like device size sheets and lay them on a table and ask people, well, if I tap in this area, where would I go? What would you expect to be the next screen? Mm-hmm. Friend of mine and I were working on a voice menu system for a healthcare company, right? You call in and you say things and then it goes forward and back. And we were trying to figure out how to prototype that, right? So I'm an assistant GDE. I thought, well, I could build us a cool little demo with Assistant and we could talk to it and all that kind of stuff. And my friend he's kind of being really quiet, sitting across the table. And all of a sudden he just looks up at me and he holds up his phone. And well, yeah, you got a phone. Good job. What do you want? He goes, you know what? We're doing this way too hard. He said that here's the point. We already have a device that can listen to somebody and let me talk to them. If we just have people test our prototype by calling in and talking to someone reading a script, we're going to learn a lot. And we're going to do it a lot faster and a lot cheaper than we would have by building all this cool stuff. Mm-hmm. So look for the things that are around you. I know we're in a tech-centric discussion, but it doesn't always require technology to figure out if your idea is a good idea. Talking to people, watching how they use it, giving people examples of things they understand or in a context they understand, prototyping. There are a bunch of cool prototyping tools out there. I mean, things like Figma, InVision, writing HTML and CSS. If you got a mobile app, maybe building a web app first is a good way to start testing it. But these are all things that you should probably be doing a little further down the road. And again, just like the technology that's cool this week, well, the way you prototype or the way whatever, if you get caught up in whatever the cool way is of prototyping, you're doing it because you're learning a tool, not because you're learning whether your idea has legs or not. So that's kind of my argument is like figure out how to prototype something as simply and quickly as possible, and then just keep doing it and keep doing it. You'll hit a point where you say, oh, you know what? The big idea, it does work, right? Because we've had a whole bunch of people prove it. And I'd like to point out that that's a lot different than having somebody say they would do it, right? Because saying they would do it and actually doing it takes a mind shift. It requires you to retrain muscle memory and to combat habits that you've created as a human. So whenever somebody tells you, yeah, I would use that, and you don't have that for them to use, take it with a huge grain of salt, because they may have every intent of using it. But when in the reality, in a month, 6 months, year, whatever, when you actually have that thing for them to use, it's probably not going to happen.
So it's like, is this something that they want to use versus would they use? Right.
And so the problem is that people tell us what we want to hear. Like that's just how we're wired as humans. So if you can watch somebody and literally identify the problems that they're having, you're going to go a lot further. It's kind of like that the Henry Ford quote, where he said, if you asked users what they wanted, they'd have said they wanted a faster horse. He's right.
Yeah.
What users wanted was a different mode of transportation, or a different way to get from A to B. Those are the things that you only find by watching the audience that you're trying to work with or improve.
With your prototype and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And once you have that idea, then you can take your prototype and hand it to those same people and say, play with this, give me feedback, that kind of thing.
And then iterate, and
Yep.
so like the next phase of building out your project.
Right. And Silicon Valley likes to say fail fast. I don't know that I agree with that. I think it's learn fast, and learn as cheaply as possible. Because you've got a lot, we talk about budgets, it's time and money. Some of us have more time than money. Some of us have more money than time. But either way, you're going to eat up that stuff. So learn as cheaply as you can with as little time investment and as little money investment as you can to move forward.
Nice.
Gotcha. So you spoke a little bit about working with people and having people follow through with what they're saying they'll do. Part of the solution challenge is students have to pick 4 people, so that they themselves and 3 other people to work with on the solution. Do you have any recommendations for picking different roles and functions, and what are some best practices of picking a good team?
Picking a team is really hard. Let me rephrase that. Picking the right team or the good team is really hard. You'll hear a ton of investors even say that they refuse to invest in an organization not because of the product or service that they're offering, but because of the team that's been created. And conversely, they will invest even when there is no product or service, simply because of the team. So picking those people is really hard. In college, my roommate and I are randomly assigned by the computer. We were didn't know who each other were first day of freshman year. We are now really good friends, but part of that process, we were both in art school. We were both studying for art history tests, which are basically name and date and location of painting, and it's really dry and hard. My friend has dyslexia, so we would do this thing where I would ask him questions, and we'd go back and forth instead of him having to read the test to study for it. Everybody leaves their doors open in their dorm rooms, and so people kind of wander in and wander out. This woman that we had met briefly came in and was hanging out with us, but we were studying for a test and kind of doing this back and forth, not paying a whole lot of attention to her. All of a sudden, she stands up and storms out. I was like, what just happened? What was that all about? And she heard me from down the hall. She came back into the room, looked right at me, and she said, well, you can tell your roommate that he's single again. Storms out of the room. And we both looked at each other and went, well, what's going on here? Turns out that she'd been telling people that they were dating. He didn't know. They never went on any dates as far as I'm aware. But the point of this story is that the people that you should surround yourself with are the people that can roll with the weirdest situations that you can come up with and make you a better person and help you to solve like whatever the process is and whatever the problem is. I don't think that I could have that kind of an interaction with just a random person and live through it the way that we did. But if you can do those things, whoever those people are, regardless of the skill sets, it's those soft skills and those people skills that make the team work so much better. People will tell you that, you should definitely find a technical lead and a design lead and, maybe a business lead and things like that. And those are all important. But at the end of the day, find people who can figure stuff out, who have a track record of solving problems, right? And I don't mean memorizing an answer. I mean actually figuring out how to get from A to B. And if you surround yourself with those people and then you empower them to solve problems, you will figure out a way around everything. I would pick people who are good at solving problems over an expert in any one tool any day.
That's an awesome tip. So once you pick your team, a lot of our students, they're kind of working in these hybrid environments where they're half remote, half in person. Some are completely remote, some are still in person on their campuses. Do you have any general tips of working with a team remotely, especially right now?
Yeah. A lot of organizations a year ago got in trouble because they didn't have all of their work content in a central accessible location, right? Sitting on a server in the office or something like that. There was no access to it. So utilize tools, Google Drive, Hangouts, things like that, that let you interact with things together. Now, what those tools are doesn't matter as long as all of you agree that you want to use those tools. There's everything from Basecamp to Youre to GitHub to Drive to any of those things. And they all let you all access things together. So just make sure that all of your content, everything that you're working on, is visible by everyone. And then my other tip is kind of figuring out your communication method. There is sort of a hierarchy of need when we talk about communication, right? So if all of you are in the same time zone, it's a little easier. Mm-hmm. But if you're spread everywhere, you've got to create mechanisms that let people jump in and out of chains as needed. So a phone call or a video chat is really, really good for something that's super urgent and that you have to talk through. But the majority of problems aren't really that. They're something that you might actually answer by typing an email. Sometimes, working through the problem, explaining the problem to somebody by typing an email solves more for you than talking to the person would have. And then creating that hierarchy of how do I need this right now, right? Is it a phone call or a video chat? Is it a Slack message? Is it an email? Is it a document that I write up and put in the drive and then ask everybody to respond to? Where do you fall and how quickly do you need to know these things? Like that's the kind of the big deal tip there. And learning that is going to be up to each team, how you work and all that kind of stuff. And then my third one, this is more of a productivity tip remotely, but I work with a guy, he's a fantastic illustrator, fantastic visual designer. Except that the weird thing is he wears a 3-piece suit and tie every day. Now he walks into a creative agency of any kind and everybody panics, right? Because the auditors are here and they don't know what's going to happen or whatever. But I was like, why do you dress this way? You're scaring the creatives. He said, well, I learned I was working for myself for a long time. And I learned that the only way that I got things done was when I got up in the morning and dressed like I was going to go to an office somewhere. Mm. Like, so you're saying that you had this 3-piece suit and tie on from your bedroom work. He said, yeah, that was my thing. That's how I got rolling. And that is the best tip. I've been working remotely for years. That is the best tip I've gotten, is to have a routine and have something that makes you feel like you're at work. Mm. When you are doing that, you're in the mindset to solve problems and things like that. If you're working in the same thing that you wore to binge Netflix and in the same location that you were binging Netflix and things like that, your brain goes into relax mode and you stop working. Huh. So yeah, those are...
I'd like to give a big plus one to that one because I mean that's kind of the mentality that I've brought into working from home during this period during the pandemic and everything like that. I still wear the collared shirt, so I make sure, even though I'm just on a video camera day in, day out, I still have the collared shirt. And then now that I have this backdrop behind me, it's like exactly like you said, I'm in that work mindset because I'm on screen a lot. And so that to me is, I'm engaging with an audience or engaging with my colleagues. And, even though a lot of it, what Alina and I do too, is working collaboratively on Google Docs and stuff like that, it's still, you're still dressing the part, still getting into that mindset. So major plus one to that one.
For
yeah,
sure.
The mindset is the part that matters. It's how you get there is individual to everybody, but you've got to have that mindset.
Yeah. And I really liked what you touched on there too about finding the right tool for your team. Not like here's the best one. Finding the right tool that works for your team. If everybody communicates well over email, Slack, Discord, video chat, if everybody can join a video chat, get on camera, see each other, like figure out what works best for the team. And I really liked your approach to that one too, because like there isn't just one tool that fits all kind of thing like that. Like which one?
And it's very rare that somebody can tell you what the right tool is. During the pandemic, I've picked up woodworking. It was a kind of a hobby, and it's something that I've enjoyed doing. And I was like, well, I've got some extra time. Maybe I should do this again. But I think of that as there are a number of ways to attach wood to wood. And if you say, well, I'm a carpenter or a woodworker because I use a hammer and nails, that's not necessarily wrong, but it's also not necessarily true, right? I mean, you can glue it. You can create crazy joints out of wood that latch themselves together based on friction. You can... Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways to attach wood to wood. There is a right way for the problem that you're solving, but there's not a only one way in the global context of woodworking. And I think that applies to pretty much any tool set or technology we want to work with.
Nice. One of the questions that I've seen this pop up, and it was also on my list. So when you're working on a project, you've nailed out your idea, you've done a couple prototypes, and how do you determine what technology to pick? So let's say you're building a mobile app. How do you determine do I go Android? Do I do iOS? Do I do Flutter? Like, how do I figure out what technology I need to use? Do I just go straight up PWA?
I mean, I think we're back to the right tool for the right job, not the right tool for everyone. Right. And so what we're getting to is how do you pick the right tool for the job? And I think that there are two very important pieces there. One is, where are your users? Right? If your users are all iOS and you start building an Android app, you may build the best Android app on the planet, but you're failing if your users aren't there. Same way if you're building something that needs to live in an app store ecosystem and your users don't use that. So first you figure out where your users are and what technology that requires to work with. And the second one is, especially because of this audience, pick something that you're more or less familiar with or something that you really want to learn. And when I say really want to learn, I mean something that you've been itching for a chance to use for a long time, because otherwise you're going to get frustrated. You're going to have this vision and you're not going to be able to get the vision out of your head into this technology, and you're going to rage quit at some point. So finding that thing that you really want to learn, or that you know well enough to learn and build on. Because again, these things are never done. There's no finished state. We've all seen things that were finished and they languish and die after a little while because they're not updated. So remember that whatever you pick, again, is I mean, does the thing that you pick today for your MVP need to support tens of millions of users at the same time? No. When it does need to support those tens of millions of users, you'll have a team behind you, you'll have funding, you'll have a whole bunch of people who can make technology decisions based on the what they know right now a lot better than what you'll be able to make at this point in the process. So pick something that you can just, if Flutter is the thing that can get you something fastest, use Flutter. If Origami paper is the thing that'll get you something you can use fastest, then use Origami paper. I mean, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, they do have to submit these projects. So, so I mean, while Origami is a great prototyping tool in some aspects, but you know, as a way to still submit this, it's still a digital.
It's got to be a digital thing, but again, there's no right answer in what you should use.
Correct.
Good outlook. We actually just had a question come in the chat that relates to what you just spoke to. So let's say we're picking a technology that's completely new to us because we want to learn. Do you have any tips on how to boost motivation, how to motivate the rest of your team to learn something that might be challenging?
I think this comes down to what you're building and why you're building it. We talked a lot about generating an idea, knowing if the idea is good, things like that. And we talked a little bit about the mindset of working remotely. I think those kind of go together in that the thing you're building has to be something you care a lot about. And if you care a lot about it and you can see a value to producing it as a team, obviously, then use that as your motivation to learn how to build with the technology. In many cases, it's hard to say, oh, I want to learn this technology just because the technology is cool.
Right.
You have to have something at the end. You have to get something out of it. You know, I would love to learn welding, but I would love to learn welding to, I don't know, rebuild classic motorcycles. Right? It's a means to an end, not the thing in itself that I get excited about. So figure out how to make the project that you're building the exciting carrot that you're chasing after. And then, yes, you're going to struggle with learning the technology, but if you can say, well, I'm learning the technology so I can do this other thing, that's where you start to get that like momentum built up and keep going through the challenge.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that idea of using it as a carrot. So like get you excited about learning it and get the team excited about learning it. So like, you know, when one of the 17 goals was figuring out water and water distribution, water shortages, water challenges, stuff like that. So like, how, when you're looking at that, how does Firebase apply to that? So thinking about that gets you to critically think about these kind of problems. Like, how can I solve this with technology? So, and using that as the means to the end kind of carrot. I like that idea.
Yeah.
We did have another question from the chat I wanted to bring in. Can you share some resources on best practices for building out a project?
Resources for best practices on building out a project. Were you going to say something, Kyle?
Yeah, I was going to say, I know we have the resources page for the solution challenge. Do you have additional resources and you've looked over these resources, do you have your preference or your ones that you recommend?
So I am actually a huge fan of the Google Design Sprints concept. That is on the resources page. That works across pretty much any type of project you can throw at it or idea. And before anybody gets freaked out about a specific process or a specific way of doing things, it's really just design thinking squashed down into a 1 week time period or 1 day or a couple hours, whatever you want to do with it, right? But it's just using design thinking as a process. So I love that. You can, that's on the resource page. There's also, there's a book that's been written about design thinking or about design sprints called Sprint. Google actually has some other resources if you just search for design sprints. Another one, a friend of mine named John Bielenberg has been pushing something that he calls the think wrong process. Kind of the idea is that you think about all the ways that you wouldn't solve a problem, and those trigger some cool solutions for how to move forward and get to a problem. When it comes to prototyping tools, most of the prototyping tools actually do a very good job on their own of producing how-to content. I know like Figma, InVision, Sketch, Adobe's got a whole bunch of stuff. Those groups have all worked hard to show you how to do it. Google Developers platform in general has a ton of learning content and resources for how to get started on things. The biggest problem that I always have with tutorials or any of those kinds of things is that they're either focused on experts who want to get just a tiny bit better, or they're focused on absolute beginners who have no idea what's going on. So assessing those things to figure out where you fit in the spectrum is super important. So before I talk, instead of here's a bunch of resources for everything, it takes a little bit of thinking through to see how you would go about doing it, and where you fit in relation to the tutorial. But I think those are the places I would start. Feel free to reach out to people that you believe are experts in the field. I think you'd be surprised how frequently they'll answer you.
Such as GDEs, like yourself.
Such as GDEs.
Yes, which are mentors for the solution challenge as well. So we have a bunch of GDEs globally, ready and willing to help mentor you on this.
Definitely.
The last part, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, but wanting to expand on it is, I've seen some comments and questions flow through a little bit. How do I know that my project, knowing that the window to submit is March 1st through March 31st, which is, not that far away realistically. So how do I know when my project's ready to submit, or how do I feel comfortable to submit something? When am I at that stage? Do I wait until the 31st, or should I go ahead and submit on the 15th?
That is a loaded question. When is something good enough is something that every one of us struggle with on every project that we build. Yeah, exactly. And something that we should really point out is that perfect is the enemy of done. Right? You can chase perfect forever and ever. So how do you know when it's ready to submit? I think look back at your prototypes. I think look back at your learning. You're not doing those things for yourself. You're doing those things as something that you would document as proof for why it's ready and why you've solved the problem. Can you say, hey, we talked to 10 people who agree that this is a problem that needs to be solved and agree that this is a good way to solve it? I think if you can say that, you can probably submit some stuff. I think also you will know, right? You will know when you're comfortable showing it to someone and when you're not. Just remember that, again, you'll never get to perfect. So be willing to finesse your vision or your answer for whatever done is a little bit to know that, yeah, we're solving it, or we can see that we're solving it, right? And in many cases, you don't actually have to have solved it entirely, but you have to show that you are on the right track to solving it.
I like
Which
that.
is, yeah, you touched on a lot of great points because, as part of the solution challenge, part of the point system, the rubric that we use to rate the projects that are submitted, one of the things is, did you actually test this with real users? Another one is, as part of the submission, is they have to record themselves talking about this project. So, demonstrating, how I built it, or how the team built it rather, and what technologies we use. So just kind of walking through the steps, and discussing. Another point category is, what is the future of this? Where are we? If we have the opportunity to continue to work on this, how will this project? What does the next phase look like? So, which definitely, and I kind of set you up for that one a little bit, because I know you haven't seen the grading rubric, but it was perfect because, as you mentioned, like, there is no done. So as these students, and like some of the questions in here, like, there is no done. So you have an MVP product that that you submit, to where you have to have a plan for the next stage. There's no, hey, we're done, I turned it in, my assignment's over. So that's not how we want you to think about these solution challenge projects. And so, Bryce,
Kyle, you did provide a really, really easy bar for, is it submittable or not, right?
Yeah.
Can I demo it?
Yes.
I think that's an obvious stake in the ground for is it submittable? Can I show it to somebody and have them test it? Well, that's a obvious stake in the ground, right? So I think that there are things in the rubric, right, where you could say this is submittable in this case.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's never done.
Right. Good mantra. And Kyle, you kind of set up for the next question in terms of testing during COVID. So Bryce, you spoke about the challenges of working remotely, the need to still test your solution, make sure you're building the right thing for the right user. Do you have any recommendations about user testing, as everything is kind of crazy right now? People are remote. You can't necessarily go talk to people in person. Any tips for that?
There are several platforms available that will let you do remote user testing.
Okay.
So it's like a Hangout, right, where you do a screen share and things like that. The difference is that you can kind of record cursor movements and things like that. Something else that you can do is you can have people hold up a device or something like that with your thing on it to a webcam, so you can watch them use it. This is one of those where there's a will, there's a way. We talk about things like hallway usability testing pre-COVID, right, where you'd walk down the hall in your large organization and tackle people and tell them they couldn't leave for their break until they answered all your questions, things like that. The same kind of thing can work remotely. You just have to spend a little more time scheduling it and figuring out who the right people are. But yeah, I think in many cases, take a look at some of those platforms. I don't remember the names off the top of my head. I've used several of them and they work relatively well, but I think you can accomplish the same thing with a Hangout, just to record a screen and things like that.
Good tip.
Very, very good. And I know we're getting close on time. I know we have a few other questions in here that pertain to more about the challenge as a whole, but what are some common challenges that, across, during your career and, your learning through design and development, what are some of the common challenges that, when you're building a project on a short time span, kind of like this, what are some challenges some commonalities with these challenges that you faced?
Personally, staying invested in it is something that I struggle with a little bit. Hey, this was a great idea, and then I, get interested in something else and move on. So I think, yeah, it happens a lot to all of us, I think. But this is back to the whole finding something that you really feel is important, that you can really dig into and engage with, has a lot of value.
And how do you maintain, like, overcome that? Like, this is an idea I've invested, let's say it's, halfway into February and we've already invested 2 weeks on this project. When do you know, like, do we keep pushing forward or kill it and let's figure out a new one?
That is a absolutely horrible question. Mostly because the mental state of kill it or move on.
Yeah.
I would try really hard if you've spent time on this and you're reasonably invested. I would try to find a way to modify it, change it, pivot instead of starting over. And I look back to the problem that I'm solving in those cases. The problem obviously is big enough that I care about it, or I wouldn't have started trying to solve it. So the pivot should be the pivot, or start, even if it's a start over, shouldn't be finding a new problem to solve. It should be finding a new way to solve the problem that you're interested in. And I think that's the way that you kind of keep the momentum up. My other trick with talking to users is that when you bump into other people that actually experience this problem, it is huge incentive for you to keep solving it. But if you do that in a vacuum, right, where you don't know if anybody cares, then it's really easy to say, oh, this isn't interesting, and I'm going to move on to the next thing. So keep talking to other people about it too. It's a big part of that.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, so you went where I kind of set you up for that. Like I knew not to kill a project, and I wanted to hear you go for that. But I also liked how, to more layman's terms, don't work in a silo is kind of where like you use that communication. So even though we are remote, still connect with your team, still connect with your potential user base. Continue to ask these questions. Don't try to build something and then ask questions. So ask questions while you're building. Ask questions and continue to iterate.
And something else that I've bumped into actually over the years is tell your family and friends that you're solving this problem.
Yes.
And then when they ask you about it at the next family gathering or Zoom call or whatever it is you do with your family, oh yeah, I'm not working. Oh. Right? I mean, it's good incentive to keep going.
Very cool. I think with we have 4 minutes left, I believe, and think if Erica wants to join to ask or answer a couple of the solution challenge questions that we've been seeing in the chat here. And thank you again, Bryce, for sharing your expertise with us and the students.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Hey, welcome, Erica.
Hi, good to be here with you. Hi, Bryce. Great. Yeah, we can answer a couple questions. Dhruv, do you also want to pop the stage? We'd love to meet Dhruv Patel. Hey, Dhruv. He's a Saints fan. Maryland Saints.
Always repping the Saints.
Great. Yeah, we can take some questions. I did see a question about cloud credits. And yes, we do have cloud credits. Dhruv is actually going to send an email to anyone who has registered. So we do encourage you to register for the solution challenge if you haven't already. And we have about $50 of credits per team, but it is first come, first serve. So if you've registered and we do have these cloud credits available in most countries, you don't need a credit card for this. So we're going to send an email out to anyone who's checked that they plan to use cloud and that they've registered, basically. So yes, we do have cloud credits. Let's see, what are some of the other questions? Dhruv, was there anything else about the general competition that you were seeing?
One thing I noticed is people are asking at what stage is a solution good enough to be submitted? And we wouldn't say like you need to have every solution deployed and in the live environment. As long as you have a working product, as long as you could create a demo of your solution, showcase all the technologies behind it, how the user will interact with it. That's what we're looking for. And I'll link the judging or the evaluation criteria in the chat right now. Feel free to check that out. That's going to be exactly the points that we'll score your solution on. So again, it doesn't need to be a fully done 100% solution. As long as you have a good working solution, that's totally fine.
Great. And I'm looking to see what other questions. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be, your app doesn't, if you're building an app, it doesn't have to be up and live on the Google Play Store, for example. Great. So let's see. I saw questions about this recording. So yes, this event was recorded, and we're going to be uploading it onto the Google Developers YouTube channel next week. If you've RSVP'd for this event, we're going to email you directly with the link. And let's see.
And yes, so the registration form will be open until, I guess, until March 31st. So March 1st to March 31st is when you can submit your solution. But registration, we're going to keep it open until the end of the submission anyways. But we will recommend to register as soon as possible, just so you can get up to date with all the upcoming events that we have and also all the resources that we offer.
I did see one final question that I'd like to ask Bryce, I think is a really good one. When do we know that we're over planning before we start to implement?
I think if you are asking yourself if you're over planning, you probably are. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be doing a lot of planning, but I think in many cases you're going to know. And in many cases, you're going to know if that's your personality to overplan, that you need to put some brakes on. Good way to work through that sometimes is to say, hey, here's the deadline. Let's work backward. We think it's going to take X amount of time to actually produce this thing. You're going to know pretty quickly if you're past that time. And the other thing too is maybe break things down into smaller chunks and plan those and implement those instead of worrying about the whole project as a big picture.
And then, Erica, I wanted to bring up this one last question specifically about the UN goals. So if you have an app or a solution that you're building that addresses a specific topic, I think in this user's case, it was around detection of eye diseases. How much does the solution need to be tied to the UN goal in order to be submitted and qualified?
Yeah, that's a great question. It does need. So when you're, that is part of the criteria. I do recommend you look at the judging criteria. That is, I think that's about 10 points. Which UN goal did you solve for? And we do ask, like, which target within that are you solving for? So that is important. I'm guessing there is a project that's, the UN goals are pretty broad, so I'm sure that you might already have a project that's tying in with that. But we do recommend that you think about the UN goal, read the and try to be specific in solving for that. So that is important, and one of the first criteria that you'll see on the judging criteria page. And one note about, I just put a link in the general chat. We do have a couple more events coming up. So next week, there is a responsible innovation workshop. That event won't be recorded, so we encourage you to join live. I put the link to where you can find more information about that event in RSVP. And the week after, we have a panel with the winning teams from the past couple of years. So 2 more events. Just wanted to plug that as well.
Awesome. And I wanted to thank again Bryce for joining us on the call today and taking time out of his busy morning, as well as Drew and Erica for inviting Alina and I to be co-hosts for this week's episode. So.
Yeah, thank you. This was super fun. And thank you, Bryce, for answering all the questions. And I'm sure that if these students have any more questions pop up, they know where to find you, and you might get some more your way.
Happy to help. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and thank all the students for joining us today. So it was very exciting to see where all of you are from. A lot of great questions, and hopefully you learned a lot about, putting together, figuring out how to select your idea, then moving on to the next prototyping phase, and then getting it ready to bundle up and launch.
Thanks so much, everyone. And have a good day and evening. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye,
Cheers,
everyone.